lectures where the light goes on. We hate the ones where the light goes off. Before we start, I would like to ask all of you who have a cell phone, and then if there's anybody who doesn't, please take it out and turn it on. Once you have it turned off, would you wave it at me? Last week, there was a problem, which I learned about after the lecture was over, and that is that some people were having some difficulty paying attention and were distracted. And I know that with all of the things that you have that can distract you, it's difficult. So no text messaging, your cell phones are to be off. Try and pass notes to each other and act generally disrespectful. And I promise you, if you pay attention, we're going to learn some very interesting information. I know that many of you have started the reading for the week, and you are in for a rare treat. We have very few people that we ask back year after year, and Jim Waller happens to be one of them who has an open invitation, besides which I feel good about helping key in his wife Patty have a little vacation. We have some visitors today, and I'd like to introduce them to you. It's Laurel Ionas. Iona. Iona's class. It's an AP English class from Rancho Cotati High School. I'd like to welcome you all. I hope and know that you're going to have an interesting experience. Jim Waller's going to speak for a while. He's got a PowerPoint presentation that he's going to do, and then when he's finished, I hope that you'll have questions for him. One of the lingering questions, and one of the most consistent questions that comes up when we study the Holocaust and genocide is, who were the perpetrators? Who were those people? And there is a great deal of disbelief to imagine that they might be people just like you and I. And one of the things that Jim Waller has done is to shed some light on just exactly the nature of people who become perpetrators of evil. Jim Waller got his BA at Asbury College, an MA from the University of Colorado, and his PhD from the University of Kentucky. He teaches at Whitworth University, which you can see in Spokane. And he has moved on in his work and is now considering the role of Christian churches in the genocides in the Holocaust, Bosnia, and Rwanda. And I'm looking forward to his next book because he's an excellent writer. So I ask you to welcome Jim Waller.
Thank you, and thanks for coming on such a beautiful day. This is going to do a dozen days. That's good.
Oh,
I have to
probably turn it back on.
something on. I do a dozen or so of these university lecture things over the course of the year. This is always one of my favorite because I love Dr. Goodman. Being here with the faculty and staff and students at Sonoma State is wonderful, and it's especially wonderful because I left 36 inches of snow. I came here and I'm looking outside thinking, why are any of you here? Today. So let's make the next hour or so worth your time, hopefully. Let me tell you a little some of you have started to read the book, or will be reading the book soon. Basically, what I want to do is share with you some of the background that comes to this book from my perspective as a social psychologist. Lay out for you the problem that we talk about in this book, which is a problem of who are perpetrators, where do they come from, how are they enlisted to perpetrate this evil, and then finish off with a discussion that looks at how some people have answered that question of who these perpetrators are and what some of my own answers are. And I think the final thing we'll do in conclusion is talk a little bit about why this question is important. I've become more and more convinced since the first edition of the book came out in 2002 that this issue of who the perpetrators are and how they come to perpetrate this type of evil is much more than an academic issue. It has significant, practical, human importance to it, because as I'm going to argue over the course of our time together, if we can't answer this question, who are these people, how are they enlisted to perpetrate this evil, we have no hope of stopping them at all. And much of my push in this direction now of trying to understand the applied focus of how we stop perpetrators from being made, much of that for me is coming out of a great opportunity I've had last summer, and we'll have 3 or 4 times this year, that I'll talk about at the end of the lecture, to teach at Auschwitz as part of the Auschwitz Museum to a cadre of 20 junior-level government officials from around the world. It's a seminar we run 3 or 4 times a year. But that seminar has pushed me to rethink some aspects of my model, not just to explain how people come and do this type of evil, but what can you do to stop a culture that's capable of producing people who would commit genocide and mass killing. As I mentioned to you just a moment ago, my disciplinary background is in social psychology. What that means is I don't do work as a clinician or a counselor. I work in the field of social psychology that studies how the presence of other people influences how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. Now, in truth, most of the work in our field has to do with what you call normal human relations. How people fall in love, how love breaks apart, how friendships are made, how committees work, how committees may break down. But there's a segment of our field in social psychology that works in what I call human misrelations. How the presence of other people makes us capable of some extreme examples of inhumanities toward each other. So the largest part of my work in the field, which has now been in its 22nd year as a working social psychologist, has looked first at issues of race relations in America, but then more recently, over the past 10 to 12 years, at the example of extreme human misrelations, which is genocide and mass killing. And specifically, what I'm drawn to in that, as Myrna said in the introduction, is I'm drawn to the behavior of perpetrators. And again, to me, what's important about this is that up until about 10 years ago, we knew much more about the broad mechanics of mass murder and genocide. In other words, who the architects were, how the killing was carried out, the procedures, the systems of it. We knew a lot about those broad mechanics, but up until about 10 years ago, we knew next to nothing about the men, and it's usually men, but some women, the men and women at the front line of genocide and mass killing who actually commit the crimes. So we knew a ton about the architects, we knew a ton about the bureaucracy, for instance, of the Holocaust. We knew a lot about the broad mechanics of the mass murder system, the spectrum, but the people at the front line who actually killed in the Holocaust, in Rwanda, in Bosnia, today in Darfur, we know relatively little about those people until the past, as I said, until the past decade or so. So let me start by contextualizing the problem in the broadest way possible.
Can we turn the light off? Because
Which light?
the big light. Is that all right?
Sure. Is that okay for you? Okay. I feel like I'm just talking to myself now. That's fine. And I'm gonna injure some people in the front. So I think if we want to talk about this problem in the context, less context possible, we can put it in the context of social conflict and human history. The Hebrew Scriptures, what people from the Christian tradition know as the Old Testament, tell us that one of the first examples of human misrelations comes, and many of you know this story, in the story of Adam and Eve's 2 sons, Cain and Abel. And Hebrew Scriptures say that Cain and Abel go out and make a sacrifice to Yahweh, and for whatever reason, Yahweh is pleased with Abel's sacrifice and is displeased with Cain's sacrifice. And then the Hebrew Scriptures go on to say that at some point in the future, Cain falls upon his brother Abel in the field and kills him. Now, whether you take this to be a literally true understanding of what happened early in human history or a mythological example of how we understand human nature, I think what's instructive about it is a recognition, as Elie Wiesel says, that there are two men here on earth. And there aren't many people on earth at this time in history, according to these Jewish Christian traditions. Two men, and one of them killed the other. This is, and I think it's important to know, the first time that death occurs in the human story in these traditions. And again, whether you take the story to be true or just a mythological conception of who we are, it's telling that the first time death comes in the world, it's not accident, it's not plague, it's not famine, it's not pestilence, it's not a heart attack, it's murder. Two men, as Wiesel says, and one of them becomes a murderer. I think this has kind of set the human story off on a litany of conflicts, some of which I've described here. Since the Napoleonic Wars, we fought an average of 6 international wars and 6 civil wars per decade, 3 high-fatality struggles in action somewhere in the world at any moment since 1900. So take any year since 1900, any month of that year, any day of that month, any hour of that day, any minute of that hour, any second of that minute, and you got an average of 3 high-fatality struggles defined as a loss of life of more than 1,000 people occurring somewhere in the world at that given moment. 4 decades after the end of World War II saw 150 wars, only 26 days of world peace. Today, actually over a third of the world's 193 nations, including us, are engaged in some type of conflict. There are 2 quotes here that I think are helpful in kind of digesting this information. One quote comes from Winston Churchill, who has said, "The story of the human race is war." And I think about that quote often, because I think if you were to teach us a course on the story of the human race, and you had to order it thematically around what one aspect of human existence helps explain most clearly who we are, where we live, the languages we use, the political structures and systems that structure our public and private life, distribution of diseases, cultures, what one theme might you pick to help explain that? I don't know if you could pick a better one than war and human conflict to help understand the story of how we've come to be the people we are today. Another quote that's instructive for me comes from Plato. And Plato is famous for saying, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." And that's a compelling quote. And it's true. None of us in our lifetime will likely ever see the end of war. The only people who see the end of war are people who die. And many of the dead who see the end of war have died as a result, in part, of military conflict. If you look here, you see over the centuries, compared to the 19th century, the 20th century took 5 times the amount of life from war than the 19th, 10 times the amount of life in the 18th century. I think sometimes people look at a graph like this and they think, well, that's simply because of the rise in technology. We developed better weaponry, and that's why more people are dying as a result of warfare. And part of that is true, but you can actually partition out the effects of technology here in this graph, and you still see the same very steep upward trajectory, simply because the number of human conflicts have increased so much over the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, and 20th century. So, if you're interested in studying human conflict, the unfortunate part of that interest is you're never at a loss for data. And if you're not in a field that at any time in the immediate future is going to become a historical artifact of some type. Now, I am not, as most of you know, interested in issues of war. I'm interested more when that line, and we can debate whether this line exists, but the line between acceptable military conduct and criminal conduct, when that line is crossed, that's what I'm interested in as a teacher-scholar. This is when acceptable military conduct, warfare, when we cross over that and it becomes something different, that something different is what we often call genocide. And I'm sure in your classes and readings you've talked a lot about the definition of genocide, but I like to think of it this way. This is credited to Roel Hilberg, professor emeritus at the University of Vermont. But Hilberg said, you know, there are times in history when a group of people decide there's another group of people living among them that they no longer wish to live among them. And they push those people out. They push them out of their country. Maybe they segregate them in ghettos because they just don't want that group of people living among them any longer. But Hilbert says there are also times in history where you can take that phrase, the sentence I just said, and you chop off the last piece. And it becomes, there's a group of people living among us whom we no longer wish to live, period. It's not simply we don't any longer wish them to live among us. We simply no longer wish them to live, period. And when a political, social, religious group in power makes that decision, they make a decision to commit genocide. And as you know, the most well-documented genocide in the 20th century is the Holocaust. But as you probably also know, the 20th century has the unfortunate title given to it by people in the field as the age of genocide. Because it's a genocide, it's a century which literally from the beginning of the century to the end kind of writhed in this experience of genocide. Starting in 1904 with the destruction of 80,000 native Southwest Africans, the Herero population by German colonizers, continuing with the destruction of 1.5 million Armenians by Turks between 1915 and 1923. Next month we will commemorate, the world will commemorate, as it always does, the Armenian Genocide. Our country and many countries around the world still have a hard time politically recognizing this as a genocide, and you will have Dr. Anisian from UCLA who will be speaking on that in this Holocaust series. Implementation of Soviet man-made famine in Ukraine in 32-33. It was just almost exactly a year ago that the Ukrainian government, for the first time in its history, passed legislation saying what happened to us in 32-33, which led to the loss of lives upwards of 10 million Ukrainian peasants, that what happened to us ought to be called and labeled genocide. Holocaust of 1939 to 45, 2 out of every 3 of Europe's Jews lose their lives. And then mass killings and genocide in Indonesia, Bangladesh, Burundi, Cambodia, East Timor, Guatemala, Iraq, Rwanda, Bosnia and Herzegovina. The pictures you see here are actually pictures I took as part of a project I was on this past July in Bosnia and Herzegovina, less than a kilometer from Srebrenica, where 8,000 Muslim men and boys were exterminated in what now has been classified officially as a genocide in 1995. I was working as part of a project team for ICMP, the International Commission of Missing Persons, and one of the things ICMP does is it finds grave sites, burial sites, where genocidal killers have dumped, literally, bodies of victims, and we excavate those sites, and we bring the bones out, and ICMP does DNA analysis to try and identify the remains. This is a grave site that was discovered about 3 days before I came in Budik, just outside of Srebrenica. About 55 bodies were present in this particular grave site. It was a secondary grave site, which means that these victims were killed somewhere else, buried somewhere else. They were dug up by a bulldozer from that somewhere else, and then they were placed in this pit, which was found by 4 young boys playing soccer in a muddy field. One child went to kick the ball. As he kicked the ball, actually part of the skeleton came up when he kicked the ball. And beneath that, we find these 50-some bodies that are now picked up and hopefully will be identified and given a proper burial at some point in the future. I mean, these are, that was a pivotal moment, time for me in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because a large part of what I do as a researcher is with archival testimony and trial records and data, but to actually be here in the presence of something that 12 years before was a genocidal slaughter and a killing, and again to recognize the importance of trying to understand this question, who are the people responsible for these type of atrocities? And again, you can quantify the importance of this question in some ways by asking, how many victims are we talking about? If we look at all these genocides from the 20th century and we total them up, you're looking at least 60 million victims of genocidal violence and killing. Now, if we think, if you think of all the resources we spend trying to protect ourselves from something like 9/11 occurring again, that's a type of anti-state terrorism, or terrorism from below, and that's a terrible, tragic thing. But anti-state terrorism, just some rogue group killing innocent citizens. In the 20th century, it took about 500,000 lives. Now, every one of those was a person who loved someone and was loved by someone else, a person whose hopes, dreams, and aspirations would never be fulfilled. But if you take 500,000 lives from that type of rogue terrorism and you compare it to what happens when states, nation states, decide to kill their own, and we have 60 million victims when nation states decide to kill their own, you understand why you ask people in the field, what's the bigger problem facing the world today? Is it anti-state terrorism from below, or is it state-sponsored terrorism? Quantifiably, you have to say, it's state-sponsored terrorism that's been the much greater contributor to human suffering over recent human history. My research questions, and again, we'll wrap up today with some of this as well. I mean, it would be nice, and this is one of, I think, the strengths of your program here, is that you recognize that you're not simply engaged in a historical study of something, but you're engaged in a historical study of the Holocaust to kind of give you a catalyst for understanding what else has happened since that time, before that time, and what's ongoing today. As most of you know, we have genocide watches in Chechnya and Sudan. Jerry Fowler will be here next month to talk to you a bit about the genocide emergency with which many of you are familiar in Darfur. The general principle, then, that my work flows from is this, I think, very disturbing recognition that when a political, social, or religious group comes to power and they want to commit mass murder, they do. They have to worry about a lot of obstacles to overcome, okay? But one of the things they never have to worry about is finding people to carry out the murder, finding people to carry out the killings. And this, to me, is striking. I mean, this is something that I think can keep you up at night because it becomes so depressing at some point. But, you know, you think, if you're part of a political, social, religious group, and you say, we've identified this target group, and we want to kill them, what do we have to worry about? We have to worry about the target group fighting back. And we know now well the reality of Jewish resistance in the Holocaust. Victim groups will fight back to whatever degree they can. We have to worry about other people in the community standing up and saying, even though I'm not a member of the target group, you can't, as the state, go out and just kill those people and discriminate. We have to worry about pressure from the international community. Although just between you and I, don't let it leave this room, by the time the international community decides to intervene in the case of genocidal violence, you could have done what you wanted to do in genocide. You could have perpetrated. And you could have killed all you wanted to kill by the time the world's going to step in and stop that in most cases. But of all these things you have to worry about, what you don't have to worry about is finding the killers. In other words, a genocidal regime intent on committing mass murder has never had to throw its hands up and say, as much as we'd love to kill these people living among us, we can't find the people to do it. They can always find the people to do it, and this is really the least of the obstacles they have to worry about to commit genocide. And so that leads me to my two research questions, which are these. How many people does it take to carry out genocide and mass killing? Okay, if this isn't a problem, you can always find people to carry it out. How many people are we talking about? This is, obviously, we don't have any specific hard numbers on this. All we can do is offer our best guesses. In the Holocaust, the estimates of people, and again, I'm not talking here about the architects or the mid-level bureaucrats. I'm talking about the men and women on the front lines who carry out the killing. These two pictures illustrate that. You see in the top left-hand corner a picture from the Untouched group in Sweeps of 1942-43, where 1.5 million Eastern European Jews are murdered at the hands of 4 operational battalions who carry out most of their killing the exact way you see here. They have the victims dig their own graves, or they have them kneel at the edge of a naturally occurring ditch or ravine. They stand behind the victims, and with, hopefully, for the perpetrator, for reasons of ammunition, 1 shot. They can take 1 kill shot, the victim falls into the graves are then covered up. Now, as many of you know from the Nazis, this ended up to be problematic because in the heat of a colder summer, these graves began to have a terrible stench, and most of the victims who would have died in this way through the Untouched group and Sweeps will eventually be bulldozed up and then just burned in mass in a large open pit or a large stack of bodies. But again, my question is not questions about the architects, Hitler, Himmler, Goering. They're not questions about the mid-level bureaucrats like Adolf Eichmann. They're questions about these people on the edge of the pit doing the killing. And we don't know them. I mean, most of them escaped prosecution. Most of them went back doing whatever it was they did before the war, before the genocide. That's what they went back and did the rest of their lives doing. But who are those people, and how many of them are involved in something like this? Below you see a picture of an Interahamwe group from Rwanda. Most of the killings in Rwanda, many of those, especially in the capital city, done by these gangs of young men and boys, as young as 11, 12 years of age, who walked the streets of Kigali armed only with machete and with masu, which are wooden clubs that have nails driven through them, so the spike end comes out on one side. And this is what they kill people with. They kick, they club, they beat, they machete people to death with them. So how many people are we talking about in these cases? In the Holocaust, the estimates range between about 200,000 and 500,000 people at the front lines of the killing. In Rwanda, the estimates, I think the best estimates today suggest about 250,000. Let me tell you an interesting story. When I first started doing research in Rwanda, we knew that there were 800,000 victims. From April through July of 1994, 800,000 victims of the Rwandan genocide. That's a rate of death unlike anything you can find in any 100-day slice of the Holocaust. I mean, people literally got exhausted from killing in Rwanda. Okay? One of my first colleagues I made contact with in Rwanda, we were talking about this question of how many perpetrators do you think there were that killed 800,000 victims? And his response was, I think there may be 1 million perpetrators. And I couldn't believe that. How could you have more perpetrators than victims? But what he pointed out was, you have so many groups of youth ganging up and killing people that sometimes you have 10 or 12 people killing 1 or 2 people. And maybe that's how you end up with so many perpetrators. And I think probably the more responsible estimate is about 250,000 Rwandans were involved in the killing. And again, these are people who literally bloodied their hands with the killing. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the entire event in Bosnia has not been called a genocide. The one piece of the Bosnian ethnic cleansing that has been identified internationally, legally as a genocide, was the slaughter in Srebrenica. Srebrenica, 8,000 Muslim men and boys. How many people involved in the perpetration of that? Estimates are 15 to 20,000 Bosnian Serbs involved in that onslaught. So even though we can never get precise numbers about how many perpetrators are involved in the killing, the point is, this is an awful lot of people. I mean, you're talking about 250,000 Rwandans that could have been involved in the genocide. And you start to see the challenges here, not just for bringing these people to justice, but how does a society reconstruct itself when you've got this many perpetrators, this many murderers, this many criminals? And that's a tough question. In Germany, after the end of World War II, basically the Allies said, Germany can't restructure itself if we bring everyone to justice, so let's just let the two Germanys now redevelop themselves, and we're not going to worry about bringing every perpetrator to justice. Rwanda's doing the same thing today. Can we afford, Rwandans asked, to bring every single perpetrator to justice? This is important because it tells us about the possibility for a society to recover from genocidal violence. And you may or may not be surprised to know that Rwanda today is closer to genocidal violence than it would have been in 1992-93. I don't think anyone in the field would be surprised when Rwanda breaks down into genocidal violence again, because it's never recovered from the first episode. And part of that lack of recovery has been this question of what to do with the perpetrators. So the second question becomes, okay, if you've got these thousands and thousands of people, who are they? Where do they come from? And how do you enlist them to perpetrate this type of extraordinary evil? And that's really been the focus of my research and certainly the focus of the book. Other people, as I said, have asked this question. I won't spend a lot of time on these answers because I think they're all wrong. So let me skip over it quickly and get some ones I think are right. But I'm certainly not I may be a hard worker and some other things, but I'm not a smart or terribly insightful person, I don't think, in any stretch. So I didn't come up with a new question. Other people have certainly asked this question: who are these people and how they're enlisted to perpetrate this evil? And I just want to give you some sketch here of some of the answers that people have given. Sometimes people have said, well, it's just the extraordinary nature of the collective. In other words, whenever groups of people come together, groups of people do bad things. That's just naturally what groups are predisposed to do. Gustave Le Bon, an early sociologist, lived in fear of the mob in this way, because groups always became angry mobs. Reinhold Niebuhr is an American theologian from the 1940s and 50s who wrote a very transparently titled book titled Moral Man, Immoral Society. He said, on our own, we're capable of morality. But when we put together as a group, as a collective, we tend toward immorality. Okay? M. Scott Peck is a popular psychiatrist, who's arguing the same type of group dynamic. Whenever groups come together, bad things happen. Some of you have been part of groups, campus groups, friendship groups, and you certainly know this happens. I have 3 children. Those children have sleepovers. I know that when groups get together, some pretty nasty things can happen. Right? I've seen it. You've been part of those dynamics. But I think it's a terrible misstatement to say that every time a group comes together, it's automatically going to do bad things. I think what groups do is they amplify the tendencies that are already present. If you bring together a group of bad people, I don't think it's any surprise that as a group, they can become capable of some pretty extraordinary evil. But groups of good people have been at the heart of some of the most humane, caring, cooperative institutions in human life. So groups of good people do some incredible good. Group dynamics, I think, have an important role to play in understanding how people become capable of this type of evil, but I don't think they're the only answer. I also don't think that the only answer is extraordinary ideology. This is something that Goldhagen has argued in what was a best-selling book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, that the perpetrators in Nazi Germany were just living out this hate-filled, anti-Semitic, eliminationist ideology. They were driven by those beliefs. Again, in my work with perpetrators, in my reading of transcripts and interviews with perpetrators, I certainly see the way in which, for some of them, ideology is important. But I also see the way in which ideology doesn't matter much to a lot of them. When you speak to Rwandan perpetrators, the most common reasons they'll give you for killing of the genocide are things like this. My neighbor had a radio. I wanted the radio. My neighbor had a cow that should have been mine. My neighbor had a house that was a little bit better than mine. I wanted his house. I wanted the yard. I mean, unless greed is an ideology, there's no political ideology here pushing this. It's just opportunism. I think the Bosnian ethnic cleansing, the slaughter and Srebrenica, genocide, I mean, those have ideological components to it, but it's just not the big push that people want to present it as. Is ideology important? Belief systems, are they important in understanding perpetrators? Absolutely. Do they explain everything about perpetrator behavior? I don't think so. Ideologies are too inconsistent. People too inconsistently pledge themselves to it. And perhaps most importantly, very often, ideologies follow a behavior rather than cause the behavior. This is a little social psychological truism. I mean, we're used to thinking that if I believe something, if I have this ideology, then it drives me to this behavior. But in truth, a lot of our ideologies come after the behavior itself. We behave, and then from that behavior, we assume we must have this ideology because it explains that behavior. Probably the best example is slavery and racism in America. I think a wide range of scholars have come to the consensus that it wasn't racism that caused slavery in this country. It was the advent of slavery as an economic system of exploitation that then caused people to develop a justification for why slavery was okay, and that's where we see the development of modern racism in the 1700s and 1800s in this country and throughout Western Europe as well. So, again, I just want to make sure we put ideology into place. And then finally, extraordinary individuals. I think this is the most common. If you were to go home tonight or across campus and say, we're studying perpetrators, of genocide, who do you think those people are? And you talk to someone who doesn't know the field at all, I would guess that their most common answer would be one of these two. That these people are either psychopathic in some way, they're mentally, emotionally disturbed, they'd be classified as pathological in some deep way, or they just have some extraordinarily twisted personality. I mean, what both of these explanations do is basically make us feel better, because what they say is the people who commit this evil are people very much unlike you and me. Okay? They're nothing like us. They're pathological. They're very twisted. They have some bizarre personality traits. And again, we could spend actually a whole semester on this topic. So much research has been done on it. But the summarization of it is, for all we want to believe it's true, we haven't found it to be true. That the rates of pathology among perpetrators actually tend to be a bit lower than you tend to see in the general population. And in the search for this magical personality profile that explains what pushes people to this perpetration, we just don't find it. I mean, whatever personality trait or demographic you want to come up with, we find perpetrators pretty well represented all along that particular continuum. So this search for this unique, twisted, unusual, and very different personality among perpetrators, we just haven't been found in 40 to 50 years of searching for it. So it leads me to the central argument of my work, which is this: that it's ordinary people, like you and me, who commit genocide and mass killing. And this is something I've lived with and worked with for about 15 years, but I understand the difficulty that at times it is to kind of sink in for people fairly new to the field. But I wish, in many ways, I'd love to be able to stand up here and tell you that the perpetrators I study and interview are pathological, they're unusual, they're different. You can tell from their background there's something very, very different and atypical about them, and that they're nowhere near like you and I are. But the truth of it, I think, is something much more disturbing. That most of the perpetrators that we study and we interview, we find very much to be people very much like you and I. I think always here of one particular is actually the first perpetrator study that I had immersed myself in archival research of a guard at Auschwitz who was notorious. I mean, he did, and I'm not going to, it's not appropriate here to belabor some of the things he did with you, but I mean, this man committed some of the worst atrocities against the most innocent, youngest of victims you could imagine as a guard at Auschwitz. And again, the easy story would be to look at this man and to dissect his life and see that from the very beginning, he had been horrible. And you just saw this unfolding horribleness in his life that by the time he got to be an Auschwitz guard, you'd say, yeah, that's exactly what he was supposed to do. Okay? Because everything in his life has built up to that point. But imagine the surprise when you go back 6 years before Auschwitz in his life, and he's a school teacher in southern Bavaria. Teaches the equivalent of 3rd, 4th grade children. He's essentially the man of the year in his community year after year. He's a doting father, wonderful husband, a great son to his elderly mother, a great grandson to his grandmother and grandfather. I mean, he's just by all accounts a wonderful human being. He almost loses his job as a teacher, as a matter of fact, because when the legislation comes into play that teachers have to begin class with a salute to Heil Hitler, he chooses not to do it. It's not his ideology. He's not part of the Nazi Party. He doesn't see any sense in it, but one of his students informs on him, and he's told by the authorities, if you don't start doing it, you're going to lose your job. So he begins class now with this kind of half-hearted salute to Hitler, and it's this man who 6 years later is committing these brutal atrocities in Auschwitz. And he was creative in the range of brutalities he would commit. To me, this is the fascinating question. How does someone like this become someone like this? What is the process of that transformation? And again, this is a very difficult argument to admit, to understand, to absorb, because it gets at, in part, what you could argue is at the heart of us. I think the class here today is reading Heart of Darkness. Is that true in the high school class? Okay. One of my all-time favorite novels because of what it says about the human condition and human predispositions. And it fits up perfectly here with what really would be, if that title hadn't been taken, this probably would have been the title I would use for a book like this, Heart of Darkness. At heart, the types of things that all of us seem capable of, given certain situations and surroundings. I love this quote from T.H. Huxley. I'm a big Darwin fan. I'm teaching a course now in history of psychology, and Darwin's a big part of it. But Darwin was, as many of you know, kind of notorious for being silent about his theory. He didn't like to talk about it. He didn't like to push it out in public. But fortunately, he had a friend, T.H. Huxley, who was the exact opposite. Huxley wanted Darwinian theory out there, and so he became known famously as Darwin's bulldog. But here's a quote from Huxley in 1860. "My business is to teach my aspirations to conform themselves to fact, not to try to make facts harmonize with my aspirations." In other words, we all have dreams of how we wish the world would work. And if what you want to do is hold on to those dreams, it's going to be hard to make those dreams fit with the facts of perpetrators who commit genocide and mass killing. And I think it's a healthy thing, and ultimately a hopeful thing, if you take the reality that it's ordinary people like you and I who commit genocide and mass killing, and you start to make your aspirations, your dreams, fit that reality. I mean, it's a dip, certainly, in a cold water of reality. I mean, it's, to come to grips with the truth of this argument that I'm trying to lay out, doesn't make you feel good about yourself and your place in the world. You look around at people beside you, and it doesn't make you feel good about people beside you. I come from Washington State. I'd love to live there thinking that it's only people from Idaho that do these types of things. And there's some truth to that. But, okay, the cold reality is, I know people who could do this. That I myself, in certain situations, might be capable of brutalities that I would never imagine I was capable of. I'm sure that school teacher in Bavaria never thought 6 years down the road he'd be doing what he was doing. So the question comes then, as someone who works in the field, how does this come about? What's this process of transformation through which someone becomes capable of this type of extraordinary evil? And that is what I tried to lay out in this model, and don't worry about, if you have the book, you have this in the book, so it's not a big deal, but I just want to give you a rough idea. I've said what's wrong with other people's explanations, and so now I'm trying to contextualize a little bit of how I try to explain it, and while we're going into the minutiae at the bottom, I think let's just look kind of at the middle piece. What I wanted to do is say, there are at least three pieces of the puzzle to understanding how people become capable of this evil. And these are pieces of the puzzle that, for me, have fallen into place after reading dozens, hundreds of interviews and doing interviews with perpetrators and reading eyewitness testimonies of perpetrator behavior. These seem to me to be three big pieces. One is the cultural construction of worldview. In other words, that perpetrators come out of a culture that has given them permission in some ways to commit the evil they do. And typically, these cultures are very collectivistic. They have a strong authority orientation. They have a strong sense of social dominance. So this would have been true of Hitler's Germany. It was true of Rwanda. It was true of Cambodia. It was true of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Very patriarchal, male-dominated, hierarchical societies in which obedience to authority was a higher value than questioning authority. And again, I think especially you see this, in some of the interviews I'm thinking of with perpetrators in Rwanda, who simply say, you don't stop to question. When someone tells you that this is what ought to be done, you simply do that. And in this piece then, I'm looking at what are the things about a culture that is capable of producing perpetrators. And it's not that you have a culture that's full of perpetrators, but what are the cultural characteristics that make a society capable of producing a large number of perpetrators? And I think these three, collectivistic values, authority orientation, social dominance, They're three of the big pieces of understanding that cultural system. Now what's important then is if we think about how to use this information to help make genocide less likely in the future, I mean, this could be a warning sign. I mean, we know of cultures where these three things are very high and very much valued, and it doesn't mean that the culture is committing genocide, but it just is a bit of a warning sign to say, you know, this is a culture in which if a regime comes to power and says to be a good German, to be a good Rwandan, to be a good American, you must do these things, this is a culture that might be very well likely to follow along the footsteps of that regime. Second piece then is the psychological construction of the other. One of the things I'm asked often is, in this model, which pieces are most important? And that's part of my ongoing research, is to try and weigh the relative importance of these different pieces of the model. But I'm very much struck by the second one. And that is how perpetrators come to view the victim and how they understand the victim. And one of the things I've argued is that perpetrators are able to take the victim and place him or her so far outside their universe of commitment that it becomes okay to kill them. And in some cases, and I'm thinking here of actually an archival testimony of a German perpetrator I read years ago, where the perpetrator is asked while he's on trial by the prosecutor, how did you come to think it was right to kill Jews? And this particular man was one of the men who had been on the sides of those ditches and ravines in 42 and 43 in Eastern Europe doing the killing. And he's asked, how did you come to think it was right? It was okay to kill Jews. And he said, you know, it wasn't really that I thought it was right, but I knew it was wrong not to do it. In other words, it's not just a matter of it's okay to do, but they were so far outside his universe of commitment that in his mind he's actually doing something wrong if he doesn't kill them. You notice the moral extremity of that. It's not just okay to kill them, but it's even wrong if I don't kill them. How is it that a fellow human being can be taken and placed so far outside the bounds of our moral obligation, our moral authority, that we can disengage from them morally so strikingly that we can think it's wrong to not kill them? Not just okay to do it, but it's even wrong if we don't kill them. I think we see that in language. I think we see it in legislation. I know people who teach courses in Holocaust studies that set it up around the definition of the other. How is it that Nazis and Germans define Jews? Legislatively, socially, politically, theologically, educationally? How were they defined in such a way that they were placed so far outside the bounds of the moral universe? And then thirdly and finally, social construction and cruelty. What I mean by this is simply, you know, genocide never occurs because one person decides to just start killing. I mean, the killing happens in groups of perpetrators, whether that's a military group, a paramilitary group, or a gang, like we see in Rwanda. So how does that come about? What are the group dynamics that are important there? Socialization, group identification, binding factors, things like conformity to peer pressure. I mean, what is it about group dynamics that enable the type of commission of atrocities that we see in genocide? Okay? When I mentioned to you the Auschwitz guard, who was very creative in his brutality, why is he creative? Because there's something about the culture of the group, the socialization of cruelty he's in, that values creativity in their process of brutality. And they had systems of rewards, kind of symbolic rewards that they gave to each other, depending upon how creative they could be in the process of brutality and destruction. So I think it's important for us to unpack these three pieces. What does a big culture, how does it influence perpetrators? How do perpetrators view the other, their target group? And then finally, in those small groups that perpetrators work in, what are the dynamics there that push people to levels of extraordinary evil that we perhaps haven't seen before? I think in the book, I think in, you know, I should probably read my own book, but I think in the book at some point, I mentioned U.S. cavalry soldiers who, again, in westward expansion in the late 1800s, I mean, how did they get to the point that it's okay when they slaughtered natives to cut off the testicles, clean them out, and use them as tobacco pouches? How do they think it's okay to excise, cut out the vagina of a native woman, and then stuff it on the saddle horn of their saddle and think that's a prize trophy? What is it about American culture in general that legitimized that? How do we define natives as Americans at that time period in history that makes this okay to do? And what is it about the professional socialization of a small group of cowboys that engage in the type of symbolic rewards that make this type of cruelty an achievement? That they're good at what they do and inflicting brutality. I mean, in its essence, those are the questions we're asking here, because again, what we're working from is this assumption that by and large, I mean, there are a few psychopaths, sociopaths, however you want to label them, there'll be a few of those in every genocide and mass killing. But by and large, at least 90 to 95% of genocidal killers will be quote-unquote normal, ordinary men and women. How did they get to this point of doing the types of brutalities that we see in genocide after genocide after genocide? That's the question that this model tries to address. And then finally, a few things. One, why is this question important? I think it's important because the age of genocide is not over. As we saw earlier on a previous slide, right now, Chechnya, Sudan are in danger of genocidal violence. Ethiopia, Kenya, not far off from that. And maybe you know the story of Kenya. It was probably the most politically stable country in Africa until a couple of months ago. As I said to you, Rwanda is closer to the verge of genocidal violence today than it was in 1993. So how many of you have seen the film Hotel Rwanda? Okay, it's a great film. You leave there and you think, great story, violence is over, good guys have come back, they've taken control from the bad guys, Rwanda's a great place. Well, those good guys who've taken control from the bad guys, they have followed the pattern of Rwandan history, and they've become bad guys today. And Rwanda is as oppressive in many ways as it was before the genocide in 1994. Obviously, Darfur. I mean, what we see here is that, in the world we live in, with this exponential population growth, that most of the violence that's occurring is occurring over scarcity of resources. So a continent like Africa, the most conflict-ridden continent in the world today, 7 out of 10 of the conflicts are over water. The numbers of people just don't have access to this vital resource of water. So is there any hope that somehow in the future we'll become more peaceful, less warlike, less prone to genocidal violence? It's kind of pessimistic to say, but there's not much hope in the immediate future. Because the things that push groups of people toward conflict are becoming more severe. They're becoming more urgent. They're becoming, in many ways, great pushes. Is there a difference between explaining behavior and excusing it? I absolutely believe so. I mean, I wouldn't do what I did if I didn't think this. I never, by laying out a model like I've laid out, I'm not meaning to ever excuse perpetrators. Okay? One of the important people in my life is a Holocaust survivor by the name of Ava Lossman, who lives in Spokane. And Ava still visits my classes when she's able. But when I finished the first draft of Becoming Evil, it was probably in 2001, I asked Ava to read it, because if at any point Ava read it, and she thought that what I was doing was explaining away or excusing the behavior of perpetrators, I knew I hadn't done my job well enough. And so when she could read it and say, I understand that all you want to do is understand, that you don't want to apologize, you don't want to excuse, I thought, okay, for all its flaws, I've done that one thing well in the book, at least from her standpoint. As I say here, just because something, I don't say here, as it turns out, as I should say here on the slide, just because something is comprehensible doesn't make it any less reprehensible, right? I mean, something can be terribly reprehensible, and all we're trying to do is understand it. But that's not the same as saying we're taking away any moral responsibility from the perpetrator. And I think the understanding is important because, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of the lecture, I'm now part of a project called the Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. And 3 or 4 times a year, we'll meet in Auschwitz at the museum site, and we'll teach a week-long course to groups of 20 junior level government officials from around the world. And our first one is coming up actually in 2 months. And of our 20 government officials, we actually have two junior government officials from China. And what's neat about this project is when they asked me to be involved, I thought, you know, I can explain how perpetrators are made and stuff, but I'm not sure that you want me talking to government officials about how to make perpetrators. I mean, it seems to be a bit of a dangerous thing. But their point was to say, no, we want you to take the next step, which is use that understanding to tell us how to prevent it. So I'm pushing myself now to figure out how do I take this model and how do I use it to understand how to prevent rather than simply explain. And it finally is, you know, book published 2002, 2007 as Becoming Evil. So I have spoken for quite a long time, but we have a few minutes left here to readjust our eyesight and see what questions or comments you have that I could respond to.
Like, the individual lacks a certain kind of self-knowledge and knowledge of their own shadow side, of their own conscious. So, that guy in Bavaria, the teacher, in that culture, there was very little understanding of the unconscious. And so, he didn't have the awareness that he was capable of doing that before he did it. And so I'm wondering if you see it that way, that each of those individuals who made up those groups just lacked this kind of, I don't know what, basic psychological self-awareness.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I'd say two things. One is, I am very much interested in the individual. My concern with the group is mainly with the impact the group has on the individual and not the other way around, as some people work on. Now, your question is a crucial insight, because the question is about, you know, is there some lack of awareness that we all have that maybe predisposes us or makes us capable of doing this, and can we correct that in some way? And in truth, I do hope that's a large part of what the book and research does, is that I want to push a self-awareness that we're all capable of something like this. Because I think that self-awareness can make it less likely to occur. And what I'm thinking of specifically is, you know, the tendency of the world to sit by and wring its hands when these horrible things happen, because we're always surprised that people could be capable of this in humanity. I don't want us to be surprised any longer. I don't want to assume it, but at least don't be surprised when it comes up. In Darfur, Chechnya, Rwanda, or wherever, know that this is part of the basic human condition in many ways. And that self-awareness, to me, is an important piece of it. And so that's where, you know, sometimes people will hear me speak or read the book and see it as inherently pessimistic. I mean it to be inherently optimistic. Self-awareness is good knowledge. Even when it's painful, self-awareness, it's good. And I do think we need to have this depth of self-awareness that says, you know, this is something we all inherently can be capable of. And the more we understand that, I think the greater chance we have of trying to forestall that at some point. Thank you. Yes, over there and here.
I have a question. You went through all the different causes, you know, different explanations with Goldhagen, all the other ones, and then in your model, you list a lot of the same characteristics. So are you mainly arguing an alternate cause, and is that the basis of it? You didn't come up with any, were there any other characteristics that you can identify as unique to your model?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's a good question. You know, H.L. Mencken was once credited with this quote, that for every complex problem, there's a simple solution, and it's always wrong. And that pushes my own thinking on this. The ones I disagreed with were monocausal, single-cause explanations for perpetration of evil. It's just ideology. It's just group dynamics. And what I try to be clear about saying is those things are important, and you're exactly right. You stayed away. You saw that those pieces were in my model as well, and they are important. But my model is a multi-causal model of how this evil comes about. And I don't make any apologies for its many listings and causes. because I think anything as complex as understanding the transformation of ordinary people and genocide killers, it's never going to have one cause to it. It's never going to have one explanation. So I think with a couple of exceptions, there's no one I listed on that slide that I'd say I disagree with them completely. It's just I disagree with the emphasis they place on this cause as the only factor that precipitates evil. I think ideology is important. I think group dynamics are important. But I think it has to be understood within a broader context of influential pieces. And that's what my models try to do. It's try to be, what I wanted to do is synthesize a wide variety of explanations and pull them together into one coherent understanding. And that's where I'm not being overly modest when I say I'm not creative, I'm not very bright. I think I can see things, to me, that I can step back from and ask the question, how can we fit together into a coherent understanding? And that's what I try to do here. Does that make sense? Yes?
Who in the world is now taking all of these theses that you've developed and grouped them together and saying, now we've got all this information about the different personalities. Can we see this coming in Kenya? What can we do about it?
It's a great question. There are certainly people who are studying this research. I mean, every week, a couple of weeks, I'll get a note from someone, email, saying they take the model. The most recent one is a female scholar in Central America who's applied it to understanding the recruitment of women into gangs in Central America. And some pieces of the model help her in that, other pieces not as helpful. So I know researchers are doing it. The question is, to what degree would the UN, our country, be motivated to come to some understanding of how can we be warned of genocide if it's occurring? And that's a great question because we have genocide early warning systems by the handfuls. I mean, they're out there. It's not that we don't know enough to predict genocide. It's really the question, do we care enough to predict genocide? Because if we can predict it, if we can stop it, it gives us the responsibility to do so. And the world is hesitant to pick up on that responsibility. That's the kindest thing I can say. The world is just hesitant to pick up on it. In truth, we don't, and we're not going to. And what if the question is state sovereignty? What if the question is an African life worth a European life? That's a real politic question that people won't say outright, but it underlies a lot of our decisions about Rwanda, about Darfur, about Sudan, about Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya. I mean, those are the questions we have to be asking. We have to ask in this election season our elected officials. Does national interest have a moral component to it? Is morality, is it a humane piece of national interest? Or is national interest simply political, economic, geopolitical? If it doesn't have any moral component to it, are we upset with that? I mean, Samantha Power, I don't know if you read this book, but I'm sure you're here for work. In her book, Armenian Genocide, Problem from Hell, Samantha Power says the issue is not lack of knowledge. The issue is lack of will. We don't want to do anything about these things, so we're not rushing to pick up the knowledge because that gives us in some ways the responsibility to want to do something about it. And the issue is, can we shape, as a people, a political will for our country, for the international community that says it's important for us to stop the slaughter of innocent people? We haven't done so to this point in history. And so it's why, for all the wonder of a place like the U.S. Holocaust Museum, you leave there, and the final phrase you see is never again, and you can pick up the bumper stickers and rocks with never again carved on them. The truth of it is we've come nowhere close to that. Never again is really ever again. It keeps happening never again and again and again. So again, it's not the lack of information, it's the lack of will. And I think that's one of the great things about a program like this. You're getting information, but I think Dr. Goodman and others would say, you also hope that you're shaping a political will to want to make a difference in the world around you. And we haven't got the critical mass of people yet to do that, either in the general public or certainly as elected officials. Yes?
In your view, in your list of mass killings and genocide, you list Iraq from the earlier period. Now we are hearing that there are 250,000 to 1 million Iraqis that have been killed since 2003. How do you put that into the mix in terms of our moral position at this point as a country? We as part and parcel, as citizens of this society.
Well, thanks for your time. No, that's a great question. Academics will say to you, and I'll say this first as an academic, that genocide has a clear definition to it. And the UN has a working definition, and it's what the academic community has adhered to. So anything not listed on the slide from the 20th century that were atrocities, they just don't meet that standing definition of genocide. And what is happening in Iraq because of American policies doesn't meet the standing definition of genocide. But certainly then as a citizen, you'd say, we're still talking about slaughter on a wide scale here, on a massive scale, and because it doesn't meet an academic definition, it doesn't make it any less horrific. And this is what stalled us on Darfur for so long, right? Is Darfur genocide or not genocide? Does it matter when 15,000 people are losing their lives, what it's called? It's death. It's destruction that could be stopped. And I think certainly the same thing can be said about Iraq. It is not, what's happening there will not meet any technical academic definition of genocide. It's murder, mass murder on a large scale, indifference or active violations, however you want to describe it. Doesn't make it any less horrific. No, it doesn't at all.
Could you actually tell us if it's not based on time or numerical death toll, what is the academic definition for genocide?
Yeah, I won't do this off the top of my head, but the UN definition in Article 2 lists 5 different categories: racial, religious, ethnical, national, I forget the 5th one, with systematic planned destruction in whole or in part. So part of the definition of genocide is that it is listed in certain categories. It does not include gender, does not include, for instance, socioeconomic status or class there. It also has this systematic intentions piece to it, and there's a power differential implied that you have a state here murdering its own citizens. And this is where Iraq wouldn't fit the definition, because it's not the Iraqi state that's carrying out the slaughter of the civilians. Some people would argue it's an occupying state in force. So that's the UN definition, which some people would say is actually constructed to leave out more things than it includes. And again, that becomes a problem of political will. And I know of no academic in the field that's happy with the UN definition. But at the end of the day, when international justice has to take a role in this, they're going to go by a definition that almost everyone in the field would agree upon is flawed. Yeah, but I'm sure Dr. Goodman can get that precise definition too. You can go to the UN website. It's a Genocide Convention from 1948, and Article 2 specifically lays out the definition of it.
The other part to that was, speaking about Iraq, last week there was 100 people killed in Palestine. So where the connection between apartheid and occupation plays in the genocide.
Yeah. And the other connection people often make is, is there any difference explaining how people become perpetrators of genocide versus how we train people to become military soldiers? And it's a tough question. And it fits though with my thesis, which is I'm not saying that here is all of human experience, and then over here, separate and discrete from it, are perpetrators of genocide. I'm saying this is all of human experience on a continuum. And here at the extreme, perpetrators of genocide and mass violence. Will on this continuum be how we make good soldiers? Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be part of the same experience. If you're interested in that, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, now retired, has written a book entitled On Killing. And I referenced part of David's book in my first edition, and he's referenced parts of my work in his subsequent editions. But he writes about how the military trains people to be good soldiers from an insider's perspective. And we share quite a few similarities in that process of training people to become killers. But obviously what I talk about for genocidal killers is just an extreme variant of what he's laid out in understanding for military psychology. One final question. I suspect you want to get outside. I know I'd like to, since we must know. But one final question, yes?
I'm compelled to ask this because it's been plaguing me since I started reading this book. I've been looking at your model, and I just cannot wrap my mind around. I can understand ordinary people committing murder and maybe genocide, but it's the actual act. It's the atrocity of, like, your first story of Dovey, what happened in Armenia. How can those men do that?
Right. Right.
How can they do that to those women? And throwing babies up and catching them on bayonets, I mean, that's my big question. Is
Right.
how can you, I can't rationalize. I look at that model, I don't see.
Yeah.
I don't see the answer.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Two responses. One is that, we live in a country that we can't say we've never committed genocide as a country, but we live in a country that's pretty well distant from any recent genocidal activity. So it's very easy for us to look elsewhere and say, how could they do, because we just can't imagine these things happening. But you have to, again, kind of use your historical imagination, go back in time to Germany, the crowning country of intellectual achievement at the time of Hitler's rise to power, and that country would have also read and reacted just as you did. What in the hell type of people could ever do, anything like this? So, it's difficult to put ourselves in those shoes because we're relatively distant from it here. But the other thing I'd say in terms of the issues of how it happens that brings out, and I'm sorry that the model doesn't, I do understand the model can be a bit dry in the sense of, it still doesn't explain that first act. And I fully appreciate that. But where I would disagree with other people who've worked in the field, like Goldhagen, who would say the Nazis were so ideologically driven that as soon as they were given permission by Hitler, they started killing, they enjoyed it, they did it with great lust and great abandon. I have not yet seen that in any case of perpetrator behavior. What I've seen are perpetrators who, the first killing, they have to be egged on, they have to be pushed, they vomit afterwards, they have nightmares, some of them have hallucinations. It's a terribly difficult thing for them to do. But once they've done the first one, the second one is easier, the third one is infinitely easier, and you just have this progression. That still doesn't answer your question about how they do the first one, except to say, very, very seldom is the first kill for any perpetrator in genocide, in military context, anything. Very seldom is that first kill easy. But the point of the transformation piece is to say, once you have made that commitment to kill, and once you've done it, because people have egged you on, because people have literally held your hand and pulled the trigger while your finger's been on it, once that one's been done, you very quickly find your way mentally, psychologically, emotionally, to be able to do this, not only do it, but do it with great zest and enthusiasm at times. And again, I hate that that's part of human nature and existence. It'd be great if we said everyone always has to be pushed to do this, but it just isn't the reality as it fits. So, thanks very much for your question. Should we wrap up?
Yes.
Here?
Thank you very much.